Hello, everyone. Welcome to Food Integrity Now. I'm Carol Gervais, and I'm the host of the show. And I'm thrilled to have my guest on today, Robyn O'Brien. And today we're going to be talking with Robyn about her new book. And her new book is called Seeding Innovation, and it's the path to purpose and profit in the 21st century. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about Robyn, and this doesn't really even do it any justice. You're so much more than this, but I'm going to let people know a little bit more about you. Robyn is a best-selling author, speaker, entrepreneur, and investor who thrives at the intersection of courage, authenticity, innovation, and leadership. Her critically acclaimed books, The Unhealthy Truth, How Our Food is Making Us Sick and What We Can Do About It, and her newest book, Seeding Innovation, The Path to Purpose and Profit in the 21st Century, established her as a thought leader and change maker. She is a partner at Montcalm. Did I say that correctly?
Yep.
Okay. And was listed on the Forbes Impact 50 list for her work at the intersection of food, finance, and climate. Boy, that encompasses a lot, Robyn.
Well, I think probably the most important and motivating force is that I'm also a mother of four, and my kids are between the ages of 19 and 24. And just last night, I was hugging my youngest before she went to bed, and I just said, "You guys are you're my why, you're my motivation for
Oh,
everything."
wow. That's beautiful. You're going to make me cry already. So I interviewed you in 2011 after your first book, The Unhealthy Truth. And I can't believe how much time has gone by. I mean, you and I have been kind of on the forefront of this movement for a long time, and we've gone in a little bit different directions, but I feel like there's a commonality. And you were also featured in the film Common Ground, which I highly recommend to everyone. And I saw you at the film opening, which was really cool because I hadn't seen you in years. But I really recommend everybody check out that movie because it's an important movie.
Yeah, we need a toolbox with lots of resources because it's not one size fits all. But it's an open invitation for everybody to participate and find a way that they can make an impact. And I think that's what makes this movement so exciting. Like you said, I mean, you're in your space doing your thing, leveraging all of your talent. I'm in my space doing my thing, leveraging my talents. And that's really the opportunity for everyone that wants to participate in building a healthier food system.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it takes all of us.
100%.
Yeah, yeah. So back to the book, Seeding Innovation. I would describe this book as like a guide for using innovation and integrity to create business. But that seems too simplistic. This book is so much more. You talk about things like breaking through your own personal ceiling or limits and creating a business or a goal, and how you can use courage, love, and innovation to create whatever you desire. And not only for your business, but to work with your fellow humans and the planet. So it encompasses the whole, which I love. So first of all, I'd like to get started with a few of those concepts that could inhibit you in creating a business or creating anything. And I've listed a few of those, and I'd like you to share your wisdom on how maybe we can transform these. I know this is a long explanation, but give us a Reader's Digest version on some of these. Okay, the first one is paradigm blindness. What does that mean?
Well, I appreciate you taking the time, Carol, and I love the way you describe it. It really is a book on innovation and integrity in a world where there is so much noise. And, in the early years of my work, like you said, I mean, it's been almost 15 years that we've known each other. I was so early to calling out the pollution of the food system. People didn't want to hear it. They didn't want to believe that the government could be that co-opted. by the lobbyists and by influential money and power. We now understand it to be true today in a way that 15 years ago, even if you think back 15 years ago, the tools on the internet were different. I mean, we didn't have viral TikTok sensations. Things didn't go viral quite as quickly. And so, speaking to this, as a mother of four who has always been at this intersection of food and finance, no one wanted to hear it. And there were very few people, even in the organic space, I think, that were ready to challenge these multinational agrochemical companies. And that was surprising to me because I thought I would have allies that didn't emerge in the early years. And I remember somebody saying, we were kind of watching you to see what would happen to you. And that's exactly what it felt like. It felt like I was literally walking into the arena completely by myself, to go to battle with a massive agrochemical corporation on my own. And I was asked very early on by a documentary filmmaker how I was able to do that. And still the answer is the same. It was my faith. The faith that I had, that I was raised in, was so profound and so deep. And it's been an incredible compass my entire life. And then I also have dual citizenship, and my mother is from New Zealand, and thankfully was raised with her voice always saying, just because we do things this way in the US doesn't mean that's how other countries do them. And so when I began to look at how corrupted our food system had become, how polluted it had become, how contaminated it had become, my first thought was, what's it like in New Zealand? And in New Zealand, genetically engineered ingredients are not allowed planted in the soil. And that was the foundation for my work from the very beginning. And it's why I say you have to be who you are. You have to lean into 100% who you are with authenticity, because that's actually your insight and that's where your strength comes from. So in the beginning, here we were in the US, blindly eating genetically engineered ingredients. We had no idea it had been introduced into the food system in the 1990s. And then my mother's country, where I have a citizenship, they do not allow it planted in the soil. And so that discrepancy, to start with that massive discrepancy, was where I started. And what was fascinating was, I also say, you've got to know what you're good at. You've got to know where your weak spots are, where your blind spots are. For me, where I needed to build out support were with scientists. I don't have a medical background. I don't have a science background. Wicked smart finance background, did a ton of investments, a ton in the food industry, didn't have science. So I reached out to Ken Cook at the Environmental Working Group, who is a soil scientist by training. This was in the very beginning. And he immediately put me in touch with 3 other soil scientists. To this day, those 4 guys are still some of my closest friends. And it's something that I didn't speak to a lot at the time because I was so careful as I move forward to protect the people that I love. That was always a big motivator for me. So I kept quiet on things that I never regretted keeping quiet on certain things. And those 4 scientists were just foundational to me moving forward. They were providing science, they were providing insight. When I had questions, they were immediately responsive, and it was fascinating. And so what I would say is paradigm blindness is when you don't know what you don't know. And we all have those moments where we just don't know what we don't know. And that, to me, in the very beginning of my work, there was so much paradigm blindness. I had no idea what was going on in the food system. All I knew was this, and all I knew was sort of what I'd learned and what I'd heard and what I trusted and what I believed to be true. And so paradigm blindness is one of those opportunities where you can step back and you say, what do I not know? And how can I actually build out a team that has a depth and diversity of experiences so that all of my bases are covered? Because I have only ever walked through this world as who I am today, as this white woman today. So I haven't had the experience of an Indigenous leader or a Black woman trying to fundraise, and so it's, again, how do you pull together a team so that you have that collective experience and wisdom? And that helps mitigate these blind spots that we all have. We all have them. And so paradigm blindness is really, it's speaking to that. And I walk the reader through it because what I've learned over the last 15 years is to really stand in my own vulnerability and say, look, these were the assumptions I made. This was the education that I had. And while things may have been well-intended, these were my blind spots. And when you have to come face to face with your own ignorance, basically, and your own blind spots, there's shame in that. And so there's so many leadership books, and it's like, if you don't go into that work, you're just you're sprinkling stuff on the top, without actually going in underneath and saying, this is how you dislodge these uncomfortable assumptions and beliefs. This is how you dislodge the shame so that you can make room for the growth that I feel is so essential for leadership in the 21st century.
Yeah, that's an excellent explanation, and I get what you mean. I mean, even I'm a life coach and a holistic nutritionist as well, and sometimes some of my clients will ask me a question that I do not know the answer to. And so I can't pretend that I know or make something up. I have to be authentic and say, I really don't know the answer to that, but I know there's somebody who does. Let me get back with you. So that is what you're
Again,
talking about.
100%. I mean, all 4 of my kids are interviewing for jobs and, internships and all that right now. And that's it. I said, when you do not know the answer, do not try to fake it. Just say, I don't know the answer. Could I get back to you on Tuesday or whatever, and there's strength in that. And I think it's, I think for a long time, vulnerability was perceived as a weakness. It's absolutely a strength, because when you can recognize where you're vulnerable, then you know where to build out, your team, where to build out your expertise,
Yeah.
where to focus. If you
And it's an
deny,
opportunity to learn.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, okay, the next issue is scarcity.
I think that there has been a lot of conditioning, just I think a lot of us in our upbringing was this concept that there's not enough to go around. And if you have something, that means there's less for me. And that mindset is very downward and very extractive. It results in that taking mentality. And, I think particularly with women, the scarcity mindset of, there aren't a lot of women on boards. There aren't a lot of women yet in C-suites. There aren't a lot of women in the finance industry. And so the conditioning was sort of like, oh, we've got to like elbow, get in there, and I want to be the woman. And as I've gotten older, I'm like, that's absolutely the wrong approach. Where there is abundance and expansiveness of opportunity, it means that you're building out the table. And instead of jockeying, for singular spaces, it's how do we actually build better and build out more. And when you make that shift, and it was really Lynn Twist in her book, The Soul of Money, where I really started to understand this. And this was probably 20 years ago when she talked about scarcity mindset and how we get into operating from a place of fear because we worry that there's not enough, versus understanding that there's an abundance of opportunity, there's an abundance of capital. And if we can operate from that abundance mindset, we're operating from a much more expansive, courageous place. And I think when we operate from fear, I really do believe that there's sort of two compasses we can choose every day. You can operate from this place of fear. And when you do, it's only really navigating you around your ego and around shame, because that's what fear does. It's there to protect your ego,
Yep.
and it's there to protect any shame. And then the other compass is really, it's this compass of courage, which is derived from the Latin word cor, which is for heart, which, to me, the work has always been a love thing. So if you choose the compass of courage, and you're operating with that just limitless abundance that is love. In my case, it is this love that I have for my children and their generation and what they deserve and what they're inheriting from us. Then you're operating with this sort of, I can figure it out attitude. You will figure it out and you don't retract. Fear is a very contracting energy. And in the early years of my work, when I was speaking to this and speaking to the contamination of the food system, the incredible rates of diseases that we're seeing in this generation of children that now is called Generation RX, I just thought, I remember listening to early speakers in the space and thinking, I don't want to listen to this person anymore. I could literally feel it in my body. I'd had 4 children thinking, I can't hear this. It's too hard to hear. So then I had to sort of go internal and say, how do I tell the story in a way that allows people to open up instead of shut down? Because I was shutting down. So I didn't want that to happen with the audiences. So I actually studied different thought leaders and different people that had been presenting, controversial subject matter at the time, when it was being presented. And I looked at Martin Luther King Jr., for example, and the civil rights work that he was doing. And he always led with love. Love was always a thing. It wasn't fear, he was going to lead with love. And so that was a huge takeaway as I read his speeches and studied his presentations. And then another one that I studied was Harvey Milk, because as he was sort of bringing the concept of gay marriage forward, which was hugely controversial, he really led with gratitude. And so I thought, okay, so if I take love from King and gratitude from Milk, and then I studied people like Al Gore, when he had been presenting an inconvenient truth and all of the data that just continues to present on climate and why there was so much denial wrapped around that. And I thought, he does an incredible job in that film of presenting all of the data around the science of climate change. But then at the end, it was sort of you're dropped. And because the solutions were like change a light bulb, I mean, really, I just kind of want to jump off a cliff. And I thought, I cannot take people to the edge like that without also then giving them the parachute and showing them how we're going to get to the next level solutions. You can't just, you can't minimize that piece of it. And so I started to really very intentionally construct how I spoke about this so that people felt that they could participate. And I have always believed that what I want to see is 100% participation along this spectrum. And I really don't care where someone is or where they work. I want them on this spectrum of moving this thing forward so that we can all get there. And for some, they're going to have to start like in the baby pool over here. And for others, they're going to go straight into the deep end. Again, it's not one size fits all, but I felt that by operating from that mindset of courage and love and abundance, then people feel like they're energetically invited to participate, as opposed to that scarcity mindset and fear and shutting down. That just, it's not an open invitation. And what we need to build the solutions, to the challenges that we're facing is collaboration across so many different sectors, across so many different industries and so many different groups.
Yeah, I love what you said about collaboration. And I was thinking, you made a comment about women and being in the finance world. And I think that we were taught, many of us were taught to compete with other women.
Oh, I think it's one of the biggest disservices of the paternalistic patriarchy mindset.
Yeah, like she's prettier, she's smarter, all of that stuff. And I think it's just so important to move away from that and into collaboration versus the competition thing. And
I mean,
I
I'm to a point now where when I see other women that are in their 40s and 50s who are still navigating this with grace and beauty and intelligence, I know exactly what they've been through. I know exactly the comments that they've endured. I know the abuse they've endured. I know the misogyny that they've endured, and just there is an immediate respect. When I see another woman on a stage get up and present and she is put together and she's doing it in this beautiful, powerful way, I mean, there is just a sisterhood and a respect that is absolutely immediate. I mean, when my first book came out in 2009, you think back to then, those were the early days of cyberbullying, really. And I was an early case of cyberbullying. And I can remember when the comments started to come in, whether I was on the Today Show or, there were different opportunities in the media. And when the book published on Mother's Day of 2009, the very first comment on Amazon, right after I went on the Today Show, was, "Why are we going to listen to a blonde mother of 4 who has fake boobs?" And I was like, wow, and it was absolutely fascinating. And I thought, I'm flattered. I was clearly wearing a great bra that day because I don't have fake boobs, and I don't care if somebody does have fake boobs. But the fact that that's what they were saying, the fact that that's what they were coming at me with that type of slander. So I showed it to the kids who, clearly know the truth about their mom. And I said, look, these are anonymous bullies. They're not even brave enough to put their own names on things. They hide behind these, fake names. And I said, so here's what I've got to do. Like, am I going to let these people define what they think is the truth, or do I continue to live this truth and continue to speak this truth? And there were so many times over the early years. I mean, the bullying was absolutely horrific. It was horrific. And the intimidation tactics that were employed, they were horrific. And I just remember thinking, like, I have to absolutely stand in this truth. And I worked for, in the early years of my investment work, this great guy named Charles. And right out of business school, he was one of my first managers. So lucky, because he said, whatever you do, you want to make sure you want to read about it on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. And it is, honestly, I still give that advice to my teams, because it is absolutely the way to live, to where, that you can stand behind every decision that you've made, and you can stand behind it, in truth, and back it up. And so I think for me in those early years, I was I was required to withstand a withering amount and blistering amount of harassment. But I kept thinking, if they're harassing me like this for my appearance, they're not actually criticizing, the actual material. And then anytime they would try to, I had these scientists that could stand behind it. And also the fact that all of our key trading partners were labeling genetically engineered ingredients for the exact reasons that I was speaking to. And that you had countries like France and New Zealand that were so careful and cautious that they weren't even allowing it planted in their soil. I mean, in France, they don't allow glyphosate, which is in Roundup, which is, all over creation in the US. They don't allow that sprayed along their railways, And so when you really look at the standards globally and how they've been put in place by all of our key trading partners to protect the health of their citizens versus ours, that to me, that double standard is so despicable and so appalling, especially in light of the rates of statistics of cancer and all of
Yeah,
these different
there's so
conditions.
much information out. Back then there was some, but now we
Not
really
much.
know.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, again, it's like where we all play a part. And so, I've always maintained that when one of us is brave enough to stand up and speak the truth, it no doubt will inspire other people to do the same. I have seen that so many times in my career. I am so grateful for the support that did come in early. And I love the stories that come in now, where I've got people that are like 30 that are like, I started my company because when I was 18, I saw your TED Talk. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And that's what a movement is, and I think that's why energetically I was like, this has to be open and celebratory and abundant and just love fueled. It's like, bring your passion, bring what you're passionate about. And to watch that continue to grow and to continue to support that, especially I do lean very heavily towards supporting female entrepreneurs. I'm very, very,
Yeah.
very
I loved
grateful.
what you said about not taking people to the edge and just leaving them there. I think that is so important
Ah,
because we can report bad news all day long. But I never, when I interview somebody, on a very serious subject, about, the cancer rates in this country because of our food supply, one of the reasons. I always want to leave them feeling like, okay, this is happening, but here's what I can do about it.
right.
I always want to have the solutions. And I'm the president of the board of Moms Across America. And we always leave people with solutions. We're doing all this food testing and it's not good, but there are ways around it. So, knowledge is power, but you also want to empower people to not give up, to know that they're,
Yeah, I agree. And I think, I mean, I think about the first book and, the title that the publishers wanted to use, the cover on it. I used to put a heart over the cover because it was skull and crossbones. And I was like, oh God, that just doesn't represent what I believe this to be as a movement. And again, I don't lead with fear. I understand you do. Like, there's really scary stuff. And now when I give these keynotes, I gave one down in Florida last month, and I said, okay, the first 7 minutes, they're just going to suck. You guys got to stay with me. I'm going to dump a bunch of data on you that is just hard to hear in the first 7 minutes, and then we're going to pivot, and
yeah,
people came up to me afterwards. They're like, I'm so glad you warned me about that, because it was so true. Because it's like, you go down into that hole where you're like, oh my gosh, it's really this bad. What have I been feeding my kids? And as the speaker on that stage, the first thing people want to do is dismiss you. They want to say, I don't want to believe this person, like turn her off, make it
yeah,
stop.
yeah,
So the psychology that's part of this is really important. And so in that first book, it was really like, I was having to deliver really bad news. I gave super, super simplified baby steps of things people could do. And there was a ton of blowback on that. But I was like, look, if you're a mom in Kansas and there's not a Whole Foods anywhere near you, and you can only go to that big store, if you are going to use a little bit less of that colored powder, that's actually a baby step towards change. And I think sort of this purist attitude that becomes almost elite, you lose people. And so I was really sensitive to the fact that this has to be accessible regardless of demographic, regardless of socioeconomic situation. So in the early years, those little tweaks really were just to show people that there were even little things that you could do. You weren't gonna have to radically change grocery stores and overhaul your whole family budget. That in the beginning, within what you were already buying, there were tweaks that you could make. And that empowered people. And I think, some of the most valuable relationships were the ones coming from, friends who were on food stamps. And they were like, Robyn, you made me feel like I could be part of this. And again, that's where it gets back to the whole spectrum of participation and not being elite in how we approach this. And then with the second book, what I just love is that it celebrates the solutions, and then it celebrates sort of the internal work we have to do to sort of excavate these old beliefs and get rid of this old conditioning that really doesn't serve us as we're trying to change and create thought leadership and create, innovation. Like, you've really got in there and excavate a lot of negativity, imposter syndrome. I mean, it's amazing how many CEOs I've worked with over the last 15 years that speak to imposter syndrome. And that's why I write about it in the book, because I'm like, hey, this keeps coming up. And there are people that I just love and adore who are just amazing leaders who are speaking like, well, when I got tapped to be CEO of this company, huge companies, just had crazy imposter syndrome. So I'm like, well, what's that about? So really exploring those different things. And I think when you really start to humanize it, again, it's like you realize, like, we all have to have each other's backs in this work, and really those are the people you want to work with, are the ones that have your back. And there really are two types of people. They are the ones who have your back and the ones who talk about you behind your back. And so it's like, who to sort of keep close, and the others, you've just got to just do what you can to keep them out of the way.
I loved when you spoke about, you're offering small solutions, one step at a time type thing. And I was just reminded of one of the doctors who I've interviewed several times, Dr. Tom Obrien, and he has written some great books too. But one of the things he says is base hits win the ball games.
Mhm.
And that's what we're talking about, because it can be so overwhelming
Oh
to,
gosh.
you have to do it all at once. No, just take a step.
It's you just want to shut down, and I can remember in the early years feeling so overwhelmed by my kitchen alone. And I was on the board years ago of an organization that was so ahead of its time, called Healthy Child, Healthy World, an incredible board. And different board members were tackling different things, and my space was food. And I can remember first learning about laundry detergent and personal care and shampoo, and just thinking like, oh my gosh, I can't, it's too much right now, on top of having 4 children, managing that budget, the whole thing. And so I think, for whatever reason, I can feel these things so deeply. And when I sit with families and families that have lost children, and to feel the fear, to feel the pain, to feel the shame, to understand that most people are struggling with those things, I just felt, if you are not coming with that compassion, you're further persecuting people, which is turning them away from this movement instead of towards it. And so I just was very mindful of how can my work feel like I've got an arm around somebody's shoulder, sort of like a sister, supporting them as they start to make baby steps and move forward. And then it's like anything with kids. I mean, they didn't learn to walk all in one thing. They didn't learn to ride a bike all in one thing. Like, it just takes practice, and it takes rehearsal, and it takes, learning these new skills and these new habits.
Yeah. Well, there's a few more that you talk about in the book, which we're going to kind of move on from this, because there's so much else I want to talk about as well. But some of those things you mentioned: imposter syndrome and not enoughness, rejection, fear. So you can read about all this in the book, and it's really, you offer some great solutions and kind of real life examples and such. So thank you for that. So Robyn, in chapter 8, how to handle curveballs, you talk about the many issues that can come up when you're creating a business, or really creating anything, and how it really can take courage to move forward. And I think that's so important. In my work, I call it detours. And it's a little bit different, but when somebody's having a detour off of their path of what they say they want to create, rather than having them beat themselves up for the detour, we take a look at what can you learn by
Right.
this detour. So give me your perspective on that.
Well, yeah, and I think, from the early years of the work, when I think back to my daughter being diagnosed with food allergies, early, when we were all still like, wait, what? Is this even real? Are these just moms that are sort of attention seeking? I mean, that was a conversation, when she was born in 2005. So that was a curveball. Any family that's been dealt a diagnosis of cancer, Alzheimer's, autism, any of these things, like it is a curveball. And all of a sudden, motherhood, as you thought it was going to look and feel, is suddenly on a different path. And with my daughter's diagnosis, my oldest was 5, and I thought, like, how do I even protect her from her siblings who would unintentionally offer her a bite of a sandwich, that might have something in it.
Yeah.
So, I had a boss again when I was really lucky, so lucky right out of grad school with this team of guys that I worked with. And then this woman, her name was Luann, and she was the one who said, your happiness in life is determined by how you handle the curveballs. I mean, I have used that so many times. I've used it with my kids. I've used it with my colleagues, my teams, different boards I've been on. How we handle the curveballs is everything. And what is absolutely guaranteed is that absolutely all of us are going to get these curveballs. We get them. And it's a huge test. And, it's a test of character. It's a test of integrity. It's a test of fortitude. It tests relationships. And, when I was younger, I used to really fight it. And I used to really energetically go at it. Like, why is this happening to me? As if it was the sort of mortal combat with whatever the challenge or whatever the setback was. And I really had this attitude of sort of victim, why is this happening to me? And as I took on this work, and as you can imagine, I mean, there were some pretty horrific moments and chapters and years in the early years of this. And I can remember just suddenly shifting. Victim wasn't an option. It just, staying down wasn't an option. And I had these 4 kids, and I thought, like, I can't stay down. They're trying to absolutely destroy me, and I cannot stay down. So what's the option? And the option is, you got to take whatever is handed to you and figure out what it's trying to teach you.
Right.
As quickly as possible was always my thing. And so I would lay in bed at night with picturing my heart just wide open to whatever is above, whatever you believe in that's bigger than us. For some, it's the universe, it's God, Gaia, whatever it is. I would literally be laying in bed thinking of my heart open, like a shutters, and just ask, please help me learn the lesson I'm supposed to be learning in this pain as quickly as possible, always as quickly as possible. And now when I have these moments, I know, because I've done that so many times, I know when these moments present that it is something I am supposed to learn. And that's where this whole concept you hear all the time of life is happening for you. And it sounds so cliche, but instead of it happening to you, because when it's happening to you, you get into that victim mode.
Yeah.
When it's happening for you, then you get to be sort of the champion of your own story. And so now anytime there is a setback or a curveball, I do just sort of sit with it and say, okay, what am I supposed to be learning here as quickly as possible? And I will say that some of my most valuable lessons that serve me the most today were some of the hardest setbacks. And, the stuff that I navigated in the early year against the industry, I mean, to have them come at you with a character assassination the way they do, the bullying, the intimidation, the harassment, on a lot of different levels. I was early. Nobody wanted to believe any of it was actually happening. I was so early. And, when you survive something like that, you know what you're made of. And it creates a fearlessness and a courage, a grace and a fortitude. You learn how to assemble teams that are for you. You learn how to remove people from your sort of inner circle who are toxic and not for you. And those skills, I think, that I learned in the early years of challenging companies like Monsanto are probably some of the most valuable lessons. And then I think, too, the other thing that was so valuable was understanding that even inside some of the most egregious offenders were really good people who were trying to do the right thing. And so, to really, again, alleviate and let go of any kind of conditioning or assumptions that I might have and stay open to what could be possible. And it really has been fascinating over the years, to really hear what is possible. And, I think, again, it just comes back to courage. And so if you don't have people in your life who are absolutely wanting to see you at your best and brightest and bravest, the bravest thing you can do is let them go and create space for the people that do. Because
Right.
ultimately, that's what we're here for.
Yeah.
We're all flowers in a garden. If you're out there in the garden, like, you want everything to grow in its most beautiful way, and you nurture it and you water it. And that's what we're the same. And so in our lives, do we have those people around us that are nurturing and
Yeah.
literally wanting to see us rise up into our brightest, most powerful place?
One of my spiritual teachers made the comment that a friend of the heart will never depart, but a friend
Right.
of the mind will scatter like the wind. And I think that is so true. I think it's so important to have those friends of the heart, that really support me in what I do and I support them. It's not like we don't give each other feedback. That can be being a friend of the heart, but I think
Totally.
that's really, really important point.
Yeah, it's really important. I think, we keep people around because of a longevity, or we feel that there's an obligation. And I think part of the maturity of adulthood, which I just love, is when you can sort of say, look, maybe this person intended really well, but I'm just going to keep them a little bit over here and love them from a little bit of a distance, because that actually protects the space around me
Yeah,
that I need to do what I'm actually here to do.
yeah,
And, I think it does get back to, like, no two of us are the same. And so that I call it scaffolding, because anything that we build anywhere, a building, a monument, like, there's scaffolding that goes around it as it's constructed. And I do not think we're any different as individuals. And I saw that with a lot of the corporate executives that I've worked with over the years, where it's, they need supportive scaffolding around them to grow into these leaders that we want them to become. And so who do they need? Is a scientist? Do you need somebody that's, a farmer that's made this transition? Who do you need around you so that you confidently can stand in front of your team, stand in front of your investors, stand in front of your board of directors, and execute on this? And I think when we expect people to go it alone, like, it's highly, highly unrealistic to expect somebody to be able to sort of traverse this alone.
yeah,
And,
yeah,
I think maybe the scaffolding piece comes out of the fact that I did have to do so much of it alone in the early years. And I understand, I mean, the friends, the scientists that were there literally from the moment I started are like brothers now. I adore them, and I am so grateful for them. And I have such tremendous respect for them, because they were at it, some of them long before any of us were ever here. And so, that longevity, with their heads down, just doing what was right, and focusing on the integrity of the food system, the integrity of the soil, the integrity of the economics of the farming population. I mean, I truly believe that those are some of our country's greatest heroes. And we get so short-sighted that we fail to see the contribution that they've made, not just to, stabilizing the food supply, but stabilizing the climate too, as we really start to understand the powerful role that healthy soil plays in climate stability as well.
yeah, yeah, that's very well said. And, talking about cyberbullying, one of the things that I've learned over the years too is, well, two things. That if I'm interviewing somebody who is really right on and they feel threatened by, like Dr. Don Huber, I've interviewed him 3 or 4 times, and every single time I call them the trolls, they're in my opinion, most of them are paid to do this. And they come out and they just start attacking. So I don't go into fear or anything. I go, oh, I must have been really right on with my
Exactly,
interview.
exactly. I mean, that's where I got to. I was like, well, I must have nailed that one.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, it really, like, you're nailing it when they come at you. And I think, I'm to a place where even now, I mean, it's amazing people who have reached out over the last few years who once were inside of some of these places who are now on the outside. And, I think on a personal level for the human beings, it's how do we move through this, recognizing that it is just system failure. I mean, it is absolutely system failure, our food system. And everybody's pointing the finger at everybody else. And you've got to step back. And it's why I've been working with the World Bank, because the World Bank said in 2023, they issued this incredible report called Detox Development, repurposing environmentally harmful subsidies. And they talk about how there are $7.3 trillion of subsidies that we are allocating into industry with our tax dollars. So it's like our tax dollars are going into this stuff. And 7.3 trillion from fisheries, agrochemical, and fossil fuel, and it's literally trashing the planet. So the World Bank is now saying we are literally subsidizing the destruction of the planet, the destruction of soil systems, which is, responsible for our food systems. And so when, I spoke there probably 5 years ago, again, really early, speaking to a group like that, I kind of joke now, it's like I'm a truth grenade. I go in, I say these things, and I wait until, it goes off. And it's usually about a year that I wait, and then I hear back and they're like, Robyn, you spoke to us about something. So when they issued that report last year, I reached back out and I said, not sure if you guys remember me, I spoke, during COVID through a virtual presentation, and I just heard right back. And they've just released a report this year, Recipe for a Livable Planet, which I spoke to in DC in May. And, again, it's this collaboration, but to have somebody like the World Bank basically saying, we got toxic subsidies and it's trashing the planet, instead of that being Greenpeace or some, environmental nonprofit, it's like the World Bank is now saying this, which I speak to in Seeding Innovation. And the European Central Bank is the same. They're saying the same thing. And they're saying, look, we've got to recognize that no balance sheet in any company is functioning without these natural assets, and so what that used to be sort of this left-leaning thing, but it's like no company is functioning without water and clean air and soil, and especially in the food space. And so to really step back and say, how do we address this really toxic system, which in my opinion starts with how we're allocating capital. And so, I just feel so lucky to have started at the food and finance intersection on that team that managed 20 billion to now be the chief operating officer at Montcalm, where it's like we're impact. And so it's how do we allocate resources to really advance and support and grow the companies that are creating these solutions, that are not just regenerating the food system, but, regenerating farm economies, regenerating climate, regenerating water supplies.
Yeah.
It's an incredible opportunity. And that's where I get excited.
I want to, this brings up something that you have in the cover of your book. You say Gen X and the modern consumer are looking for companies with authenticity. They want transparency and purpose from brands that are future proofing for the planet they're inheriting. And that's kind of what the book is all about how we need to shift this. But don't you think it starts with the individual?
Yeah, I think, that lesson I first learned, the Annie's team, Annie's Mac and Cheese, I've known them forever. I know Annie and the mom that was like, I'm just going to make a better box of mac and cheese because moms are busy. And, like that practicality is exactly right. And so she created Annie's and ran it until she brought on John Foraker, who had been with Bank of America. So he came in with all of the wisdom and financial chops and then scaled it. And when I would connect with her, she couldn't do public speaking. And so she was always so grateful that I could do public speaking. And I'm like, well, I couldn't have done what you did, And so again, it's that collaboration. And then John came in as this just absolute force, on the business model. And when the company was acquired by General Mills, I'm sure you remember, the internet just threw up all over Annie's. I mean, the comments that were just pouring out across everywhere on that company, it was just like the internet just threw up. And John asked me to work on the integration of that acquisition. So he brought me in and I was meeting the General Mills team. And in particular, this guy, Steve Young, was sort of on the inside of General Mills. And he wasn't with us that day in Berkeley, but he was so passionate that you could literally feel him like coming up through the speakerphone in the middle of the table. And he's like, we're good people. And I was like, no, I know, and I said, my approach is really different. And as we worked on that acquisition and that integration, it was really fascinating to see, how inside of one of those giant multinationals, there was one guy, Steve, on the inside that really knew how to run the offense internally, so that John then, as the CEO of Annie's, could do what he needed to do. And to see that influence continue, there's now a woman at General Mills named Charlotte, who's just extraordinary, leading organic there. And I think it's easy to abandon and assassinate these large corporations for some of the egregious things that they did. But ultimately, to shift the food system the way we need to shift it, they've got to be at the table. And they control so much. And so to stay with them and to hold them accountable, that's a big thing, is like, you have to hold them accountable. And yeah, you're going to get absolutely blistered for some of the stuff that you guys put out that really is not even food. And at the same time, the size of the organic divisions have the potential to make tremendous impact. And so, again, I think it's where we get back to this intersection of lobbying dollars, and where we're now at a place where even when the CEOs of these multinationals want to do the right thing, the amount of dollars that are going into these subsidies make it economically so uneven that it becomes almost economically not viable for them to do the right thing. And so then at that point, that's where you have to say, okay, so why are we subsidizing a toxic food system?
Right.
If the CEO of, I'm not going to say which company, has a son with autism, then, and he knows, and, he's in a place, and then, some of these others, I mean, it's been fascinating to work with these senior executives and understand what they know and where the constraints actually are. And I really fundamentally believe that the World Bank calling out the toxic subsidies, if we eliminated the subsidies and redirected them into organic, regenerative agriculture, into, clean energy and clean food, if we literally redirected the subsidies economically, it would literally redirect so many of these business models, like fundamentally right there. And so it's, everybody's played a role in this, and everybody will play a role in the solution. But I really appreciate groups like the World Bank now sort of stepping forward and saying, it's we are literally subsidizing the destruction of the planet, and it makes it economically impossible for a company whose fiduciary duty is to their shareholders to actually do the right thing.
Right. That makes so much sense.
It's like, it is there by law. If you're an executive of a company, it is your fiduciary duty to drive return to the shareholders, period, full stop. It's not soil, it's not human health, it's not children's health. So if that's their job, what underneath do we need to change so that it aligns with these goals that we all have of healthy children, healthy soil, healthy future?
Right.
And I think it starts with a healthy subsidy system. It's like, if the capital is not healthy, which is not in the subsidy system, then nothing that comes out of that is going to be healthy. So to me, the corporations themselves are symptomatic of the corruption of the subsidy system and the capital at the start. And so that's why you have to come back to the capital. And I'm so grateful for the experience I had right out of business school, working with those guys and really understanding fiduciary and shareholder mindset and what was required and why these extractive models were put in place. And now it doesn't matter if I'm talking to a farmer who grows genetically engineered corn, or if I am talking to the CEO of Kellogg's. It's like, if those subsidies were eliminated for conventional corn and soy, it would absolutely fundamentally reconstruct immediately, almost immediately, the farm economy, the agricultural system. And I think that's why you have these, agrochemical companies lobbying so aggressively, because that's the last thing they want. At this point, the beneficiaries of this very extractive, broken system are the agrochemical companies. The food companies keep getting just blasted, sued, everything, because, they're on the wrong side of this, because they've got their fiduciary duty are to those shareholders and to those financials. And as long as we're subsidizing, the toxic crap in the food system, that is actually their fiduciary duty, which is just a horrible place.
So how do we shift that, Robyn?
I think it's, I really think the policy piece is so important. And every 4 years we have these election cycles, and I'm, a broken record on saying food security is national security. I came out of a Republican family in Texas, and I really fundamentally believe that we need to be thinking about it this way. The money that we spend on defense is massive. The money to transition these toxic subsidies is minuscule compared to the money spent on defense. And so if you wanted to take 2% of that budget and say, part of the defense budget is actually regenerating, restoring the health of our soil and a healthy food system. I think it's one of the smartest defense projects we could probably do in this country. People don't talk about it that way, though. Rarely do we even hear any conversation about a healthy food system, coming out of these presidential candidates. And my opinion is because there aren't enough women on those stages yet. Other countries, New Zealand, for example, they've had 3 female prime ministers. We've seen female prime ministers in the UK and, across Europe. And, again, it's not an either or thing, but the knowledge and intuition and experience that women have as the primary influencers and purchasers of these, consumer products in the home. I think we influence like 85% of
Yeah.
household purchases, so it's like that, again, that's paradigm blindness in those politicians, because it's like that wisdom and that intellect and that experience is just missing with the decision makers.
Yeah. At Moms Across America, we've been going to Washington and lobbying. And, and there's a few people there that are really starting to pay attention. So I think, we've got to change some of the policies.
Yeah, and I was connecting with a friend who's in the energy department last week, and asking about sort of, is there more opportunity for this interagency collaboration? Because if a farmer is heavily dependent on fossil fuels on that farm and is trying to transition his acreage from conventional genetically engineered corn and soy to regenerative and organic corn and soy, and energy costs are exploding, not just for the fuel that's required to fly the crop dusters, but for the fossil fuel that's indirectly into fertilizers and all of these chemicals, the farmers' costs are just exploding. And we see that in these massive debt levels that are now on farm. And so again, it's like they're just these elephants that are sitting in the room. So it's like debt levels of the farmers, we want them to change. It's like, who is going to be able to change their business model under that burden of debt? And again, it gets back to really a fundamental understanding of business and economics here. And I think, like, I have realized that what I love talking about is economics. And so if we've got to change the economics, situation on the farm. And I think subsidies play an incredibly detrimental role. And you will hear that from farmers over and over and over again, that the subsidies just bias the decision-making into sort of this one status quo. And
Yeah.
that bias is so detrimental on so many levels.
Yeah. I totally agree. And that seems like the way out to me.
Yeah. And I mean, I think to have organizations like the World Bank and the European Central Bank speaking to this is really, really powerful. And, if you look at who the World Bank, for example, their clients are government agencies around the world, and they're waking up to the fact that 60 to 80% of the smallholder farmers are women. So, something I speak to a lot is there is just incredible data that's emerging over this demographic shift that's happening with women. And it's coming through education, capital, and, the farming community. But 60% of all college graduates now in the United States are women, 60%. And that's a huge shift.
Yeah.
So as that generation starts to flood into the workforce, those changes will continue to flood across workforce. And then on top of that, there's $30 trillion that's changing hands into the hands of women. It's the first time we've had that type of wealth transfer into the hands of women. By 2030, $30 trillion. So that's almost the size of the US economy going into the hands of women. Women have never had the autonomy to actually invest and start companies on their own without a husband or a father also co-signing on those things. This is one of the first generations to do that, because it was only as recently as 1988 that a woman could take out a business loan. The Women's Business Ownership Act was 1988,
Wow.
where you take out a loan to start your own
crazy.
business by yourself. And so when you think about, like, that's not even 40 years old.
Yeah.
And then put that $30 trillion into the hands of those women like you and me that have built businesses over the last 20 years, who are now in a place to inherit money and to stop and say, okay, we have this huge wake up call about what was going into our grocery carts. And all of a sudden we were like, oh my gosh, there's toxic stuff in the grocery store I can put in my cart, or there's cleaner, better for you stuff I can put in my cart. It's the exact same in the investment community and the financial markets, where it's like, what's in your portfolio? Do you own Bear? Do you own Syngenta? Do you even know? When I ask that question, most people don't even know what they own. And so here you've done all this work in the food system, but it's like, if you're holding a conventional Vanguard fund or something, chances are you probably have some of these companies that are just powering away, using your money, powering away, as a shareholder, that you may not even realize. And I think as women inherit this wealth over the next, decade, to be really intentional about how you want to allocate that, and that there are so many amazing opportunities to actually invest and grow your wealth that are in alignment with these values that we hold. And so we've sort of, in the finance world, had this one size fits all mindset. Father knows best. We're going to tell you what to do. Nobody's questioned it. That is exactly where we were with food 15 years ago. So I think it's going to be really exciting to see these different impact firms like Montcalm start to pop up and say, here's a different way for you to think about this, where you can be investing, excited, it's in alignment with your values, planetary integrity, if you care about supporting the environment, oceans, women, what is it? That there are going to be entire sectors and categories and organizations that are going to support the emergence of, we've had clean food, clean energy, it's clean investing.
Yeah. When you were talking about 1988 and how that's the first year that women could get a business loan, I was reminded of a movie I just recently watched. I think it was called In the Name of Sex, and it was a story of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and how she was so innovative. And, she was one of the first women at Harvard, and then how she changed some of the laws and and it wasn't that long ago when you think about that. So if you want to get really excited and motivated, watch that movie.
I don't know. I mean, I think, there were like these 4 men that were the scientists that had been at it before I was even born.
Yeah.
And I know now, like, I'm in that role for others. I think back to where my head was in 1988 as an 11th grader in high school. And I had no idea that there were women out there doing this amazing work. So I could be a business owner today, And so I think about that, paying it forward and doing that for the next generation, so.
So we're going to have to wrap it up here, but one of the things I wanted to mention in the book, you say you are the balance sheet, and investing in your emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual health is really important. And then you list out all these steps. I think there's 14 of them, steps. So just when you get the book, everyone check out these steps, because they include things like important things like sleep, encouragement, network, gratitude, faith, permission to pause, meditation, journaling. And to me, these are practical things that every one of us can do that can assist us in every area of our life.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, that really came out of personal experience, personal relationships where I saw people just leak. And I was like, oh my gosh, when someone hasn't taken care of the internal stuff, it's from their childhood, stress around work, like it just leaks all over a family.
right.
And then, the same, I'm not going to name names, but there are plenty of business leaders out there that we see every day in the news that are just toxically leaking all over everything. And I think, when you really think about you on the balance sheet, and so if you are an executive, a business owner, like you're an asset in your own company. Every single person who has their own company, you're an asset on that balance sheet. And just as you wouldn't let a warehouse or a piece of equipment just totally go to rust and totally go to crap and not take care of it, that same attitude needs to actually happen. And I've been doing this for almost 20 years. There is no way I would still be doing this today if I had not learned incredible ways to stay really clear, to stay really healthy, like head, mind, and heart, just keep it really clear and strong and healthy. And there really are some really practical tools. And, the first book is clearly like, here's the way you can eat, avoid toxic stuff in your food system. But I realized that you could tell people that all day long and they're still going to get sick. They could eat a perfectly clean diet and still get totally sick, because if you've got all this junk in your head, imposter syndrome, not enoughness, some voice you've inherited from a parent or somebody that is just mean and negative and cruel, like if you are literally feeding yourself those thoughts every day, you're still going to get sick.
Yep.
And so you see that sickness start to leak all over organizations. And so I thought, I've been asked to write a business leadership book. To me, it's not complete if I just give people all this mechanical stuff, which there are millions of books like that. You know, to me, it was sort of at the end of every chapter, I have the reader take inventory of, you know, what are your deepest fears? What are the things that you're ashamed of? Because when you are running a business and you're under that kind of acute pressure, all that stuff is going to get triggered. And so if you can work through and workshop that stuff through, you know, ahead of time and at least know it. And that's what I describe as this personal balance sheet, so that by the end, and we all have them, you know, we know these are the things I'm really good at. These are my assets. These are my values. These are the skills that I bring. These are the relationships that I bring. And then these are my liabilities. And to really, again, know what those liabilities are so that you can address them, you know, to build out against those blind spots, so that, you know, you have the greatest likelihood at both personal and professional success.
Yeah, that's excellent. I agree with that too. When I'm coaching people and they say, well, I'm eating a really clean diet already and this is happening. And I say, well, this is why I'm a holistic nutritionist. We got to treat the whole body. You know, if your stress level's at 80%, you're going to end up getting sick. I don't care if you're eating 100% organic, growing your own food, you've got to
Right.
address the whole. So I love what you just
I
said.
know. I mean, I lost, I lost a best friend, someone I'd known since I was three years ago, and he was diagnosed with cancer, you know, 5 years before that. And I mean, one of the people that had my back for as long as I can remember. It was a tremendous loss. And he had been wildly successful in private equity, in real estate. I mean, just wildly successful. And his health had just absolutely gone to crap. And he was diagnosed with lung cancer. And he called when he came back from overseas. And he's like, I understand, I need to talk to you. And I was like, look, I can tell you all the things that you can clean out in your kitchen and clean out in your fridge. But if you do not clean out the junk in your head, you will not get better. And he was super honest. And he said, that's going to be a lot harder. And I said, then that's the work. And that really is the work. Ultimately, that's the work.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Robyn. It's a fantastic book. I didn't know what to expect, and I absolutely loved it. And you can buy Robyn's book probably anywhere, Amazon, other places, and it's just a wonderful book. And I'll put a link to Robyn's website and also a link to where they can buy the book on the show page. If
So
you're
good to see you, Carol. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, it's just been great interviewing you, and you know, keep up the great work. And you
You
know,
too.
it does take a village.
It absolutely does. And the sisterhood that is this village is a pretty amazing one. So thank you for your work.
Yeah, you're welcome, and thanks to our listeners.